Welcome to this episode of the Bible Toolbox. I'm Lydia.
And I'm Luke, and we're here to help you enjoy the Bible through the tools that scholars and programmers have created for you. So today we're going to talk about a tool dealing with word studies, study fallacies.
Well, I know we've talked about word studies on our episode of Blue Letter Bible and Step Bible, so I have an idea of what those are, but what is a fallacy?
A fallacy is something fallacious.
Fallacious. Thank you for helping me understand this.
It's something wrong. So wrong things people do when they do a word study.
So this is an episode mistakes. Of what not to do.
Yes. And this isn't just like lay people that make these mistakes. Scholars make these mistakes. I make these mistakes, right? These are things that we all just need to keep in mind. Like language just doesn't always work in certain ways that we want it to work.
Sure.
Okay. So these fallacies are coming from a book by D.A. Carson called Exegetical Fallacies. He has several chapters over different mistakes people make. He has one chapter on word studies.
Okay.
And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And that chapter was summarized by Todd Skasewater on exegeticaltools.com. And so we're going to link to those. But basically all of our information is coming from those with probably a few tweaks or whatever. So we are going to give an intro, hopefully helping you be able to go and read these books and articles, which are more in depth and by smarter people than us.
So if anybody out there wants these articles or this book, we'll link it all at our website, thebibletoolbox.com, underneath this episode.
Yep. Okay. So we're going to talk about 3 categories of mistakes. Okay. And the first one here has to do with roots and time.
Okay.
Roots
and time.
So the first one here is that the meaning of a word isn't always a combination of its parts.
So I'm hearing like compound word here, like doghouse is a house for a dog.
Yeah. See, but not all words work like that. Like here, butterfly is not
butterfly.
Right. And pineapple doesn't come from pine trees,
Yep.
Understand. When you think of understanding something, you think that you're standing under that concept, or
I mean, that's a stretch.
Yeah, right. Like maybe it meant that deep in the past, and maybe it's like some way our brain cognitively thinks through things, but like it's not really that immediate or present, and not all that helpful. And what's this word mean, right?
So when we're doing a study on a Greek or Hebrew word, don't always assume that 2 roots together mean something. Those 2 roots together.
Well, yeah, and even just being careful when people will look into a word and they'll say, "Oh, the root means X." Like another example is when Paul tells us to be a cheerful giver. The Greek word there is hilarion. Oh,
like
the
hilarious?
Root, hilarious. No. Like don't always take the root meaning and force it into the present meaning. Roots can sometimes be used differently in different contexts.
Okay.
So it's just saying, be careful not to use roots too much. Okay. This is actually, the second one here is, was the author thinking of this when he wrote it? Hilarion would actually be almost an example of this as well. Like
Paul wasn't trying to tell you to be funny.
Right. Well, and even he didn't have the word hilarious in his dictionary.
I
English.
see.
So
okay. So we can't like read it backwards almost.
Yes. So you'll often hear this of the Greek word dunamis is the root there of where we get our English word dynamite.
But what does dunamis mean?
Power.
Okay. That makes sense. How dynamite derives.
Yeah, for sure. And so people often say, like here, Romans 1:16, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the dynamite of God."
Which is like explosive and destructive and like wasn't even existent when Paul was writing this. So we can't assume that.
So like, it's just like people trying to use the Greek to like make a rhetorical, cool point, but it just,
he probably just meant power.
He probably just meant power, which this is super, super powerful, right? Power for salvation. That's more powerful than dynamite. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Just be careful making those associations of, modern things that Paul wasn't even thinking of, putting them into his context.
Sure. Okay.
And okay, so that's one way that we can take future meanings and import them back into past words. But we can also do the other problem,
The other direction.
that we take past meanings and import them into present day words. Okay.
Okay.
So, like here, words change meaning with time. What did it mean in the time period you are referring to? Okay. So, for example, in the King James Bible, it uses the word conversation throughout. And when you hear that, you shouldn't think, oh, they're talking together.
Isn't it like, let your conversation always be in heaven or something? Is that the reference?
Yeah. Well, it's used a lot of times, but it has to do with your lifestyle.
Not your speech.
Not your speech.
Which would be included in your lifestyle, but it's not.
But it's a very small part. Or there's many things that go into your King James conversation. It's your whole life, right? And so that's just an example of, be careful not to take a past meaning. Because if I was to take that past meaning, oh, it means your lifestyle, therefore, and make some big point about, oh, we should be using conversation in more deep way. You'd be like, what are you talking about?
Sure.
We're just having a conversation, So yes. Okay. Next one. Don't define a word in one language based off its equivalent in another. That's probably too strong. There are times where that is helpful, where you can look at roots in similar languages, compare them to a language, and get the meaning. So this happens a lot in Hebrew in the Old Testament. There are some animals and words in the Old Testament that we don't know what they mean because we just don't have a lot of material.
It hasn't been used in other literature that they can understand what it
all
means.
We have is the Old Testament, and that's it of ancient Hebrew. We have rabbinic sources later on, but it's just not equivalent. Where Greek, we have tons of literature. So a lot of Hebrew scholars will use Ugaritic or Akkadian, these other cultures
I see.
that are similar to Hebrew to try to understand that word. But they don't always correspond. So an example is our English word deer and German Tier, which are the equivalent. They are semantically equivalent, or they come from the same root. Tier in German means animal, more generic. Deer means a deer. Okay. So that'd be if you were just trying to base it off of meanings, you would get the wrong sense of the word.
Sure.
And that kind of brings us to last one is to be careful. People talk about oh, the Jews had a certain mindset and the Greeks and the Romans had a different mindset. And there's probably some truth to that, but the New Testament is pretty mixed. And even during, we talked about the Apocrypha, First Maccabees and stuff, those are thoroughly Jewish and Greek. And the New Testament has both as well. So when you're looking up words, you have to use the Old Testament background, but also know how the surrounding Greek culture uses the word as well. And you kind of have to mix those and decide what meaning the New Testament authors meant.
So what I'm hearing is, for roots in time, we really need to be careful about disassociating the words within their actual context. The butterfly example, well, if it doesn't make sense in the sentence, then it's probably not what it means. And power and dynamite, well, Paul is not talking about blowing anything up, so we should probably just stick to power because it makes the most sense in this context.
Good. Yeah.
Using surrounding context, and then even using the tools to look up this word in other contexts to also help us figure out what this word is meaning would be more helpful than maybe just looking at the root of the word.
Yep. Focusing on the meaning of the word in its present context.
in the context that it was written in,
That it was
not in
written.
the present time today.
Right. In 100 AD, like the first century AD,
Yeah.
focusing on that meaning
Okay.
of the word.
Okay.
Okay. The second mistake category of mistakes is failing to distinguish words and concepts.
There's
I
a
think,
difference.
yes, I think this is a huge mistake, and it's hard to not make.
Oh, great.
And they're mixed together. Okay.
Okay.
So words, think like Greek and Hebrew words, agape, logos. And you can think of the, those are normally translated as love and word.
Okay.
And those are Greek words. Okay. So those are words. And those words also are refer to concepts. Okay. So like I would use agape during concepts when I'm talking about love or affection.
But it's not the only thing you would be using.
It's not the only thing I would study if I was studying the concept of love in the Bible. If I only studied agape, I would miss a ton that the Bible says about love.
Okay.
Okay. If I only studied logos, there's a ton that I would miss about words or language in the Bible. Okay. So,
because multiple words fit love. I mean, even in English, like affection, desire, like they all encapsulate what we mean by love.
Yeah. And sometimes we don't even use common words to explain the concept. I could say in a love, like, oh, and he looked into her eyes and ... Yeah, right. Looked into eyes doesn't have any love words in it, but it's still in the concept, the context
it's communicating love.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you're doing a word study, you're just thinking this word, what does it mean in senses, which often is not what people really care about.
I feel like that really limits your study.
Yeah. Where people usually want to study, well, I want to know, what does the Bible say about love? And so we will in later videos talk about how to nail into that.
Tools to actually
tools to
look
do that.
up concepts. Okay, that's helpful.
So
like right now, it's just be careful not to do this.
Yeah. And a helpful way that I've heard is to think about dictionary versus encyclopedia.
Like dictionary would be the one definition of this one word.
Yep.
Where encyclopedia would be more like background information and pulling different things together and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Right. Good. And dictionaries have multiple senses of words. Okay. If I was to say, how do you define ball?
Something that bounces. Good. It could be a dance.
It could be a dance.
Or something really fun, having a ball.
Having a ball. They're good. So those would all be dictionaries. Those are different senses of the word.
Okay.
But if you're giving an encyclopedia entry of ball, each of those would probably be different entries.
Oh, so it would be like the bouncy ball.
Yeah.
Entry.
And there would be like the football, the basketball, and there'd be a whole entry of those. And there'd be probably a separate entry about dances, and ball would be included in there. And then a separate one about, I don't know,
fun times.
Yeah. Right. But I think that's helped me conceptualize. Am I talking about a word or am I talking about a concept?
Just to be careful with this.
And and both are good goals for different reasons, but why are you going to it? It's important. Okay.
That's helpful. So that was word and that was concept.
Okay. Another caution is that biblical authors can use the same word differently.
Because they're different authors.
Yeah, they're different authors and they have different contexts and they're fighting for different things. Okay. So Paul is really fighting over, our righteousness, that we are right before God by
like
faith.
More of in a courtroom. I've heard that before. Like Paul's like fighting in the courtroom.
Yeah. You're declared right before God. You are innocent. You are in right standing.
You
with
have
God.
peace with God.
You have peace with God.
Okay. That's what he means by righteousness.
Normally.
Okay.
That's way too simplistic. But in the Gospels, though, let your righteousness exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. Well, how can being declared right exceed
anything?
Yeah, right. So there, it's talking about more like your good works, your moral,
your conduct.
yeah.
Okay.
And they're just different uses. They're different senses. They go in different encyclopedia entries, right?
Sure.
And just being aware of that. Don't make one word have to mean the same thing everywhere.
Especially throughout different authors. Which, if a word, let's talk about Romans, for example, he uses righteousness in chapter 1. Will that typically follow through then all the way through? Not always.
Well, oh man.
I'm just saying we need to be careful when we skip authors and that they don't mean the same thing, but can we generally say like John means the same thing when he talks about light? Or no?
Probably often.
More so maybe than authors.
More so than authors, okay. Yes.
All right, next point.
Yeah, okay. Okay, the next one is thinking through technical words. Okay, so technical words can vary in meaning in the Bible, different from how we use them in the Christian world. Okay.
How?
So I think a great example of this is sanctification.
Okay.
When I say, what is sanctification? What do you think?
I think of like gradually being made perfected until we get into heaven and then we're fully perfected.
Good. Yeah. So I think that's a typical understanding. You have justification, that's your status before God, and then you have sanctification is your growth.
Yeah.
Okay. In the Bible, though, when you see the word sanctification, it actually usually doesn't mean that.
Does it mean like Old Testament sacrifice?
Yeah, like you're being purified, sanctified,
kind of, which I guess
made holy.
Kind of correlates, but not completely.
Yeah, but it's more of a status thing. Like this lampstand is sanctified, made holy by being put into the temple.
Justified, almost. It's more like a.
I know, yeah. And so that's where you can put wrong. The way that we use the term just in the Christian world can be different from how the Bible uses it.
Well, because our language is always changing as well. So, like, even if we would look what sanctification meant 100 years ago, it may not be what we think it is.
It's probably true. Yeah.
Maybe even. Okay.
All right. Last category has to do with semantics or just general meaning. Okay. So the first one, we've already somewhat talked about this, but a word usually means only one thing at one time. So our example of the ball.
Like she threw a ball can only mean she either tossed a bouncy object or she had a dance.
Yeah.
It can't be
she
at the dance tossed a object.
Yeah. Don't force all of the meanings of the word into one.
Okay.
Yep. And so the example here, Moses led the assembly, the ecclesia, which is the Greek word for church.
So maybe like the Israelites were the church.
Yeah.
But probably just this mass group of people.
Good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, just being aware not to import all the meanings into one. Okay. The next one is to be careful to research the allusions and background uses of the word. So this is just do your work, know where the word's coming from.
Don't be lazy.
Yeah. So born of water and spirit. People think, born of water is something different from born of the spirit. But throughout the Bible, you're baptized in water and the spirit falls upon. Think Acts. I mean, that's what happens all the time, right?
Well, and like Ezekiel, like this says, like the spirit is doing both of these two things together. It cleanses you and gives you a new heart, like by cleansing you.
Yeah.
So just be careful not to assume and it might be alluding to something, even if it's not a direct quote in something prior.
Yeah. So look for allusions and backgrounds. Where's this concept coming from? Okay. This has to do more. These next ones have to do with your presentation of a word.
Like when you're giving a talk or something. To else.
Or even if you're trying to prove a point or you're trying to work out something in your head. You can often get stuck on something. Like you really want a word to like mean something, or you get, I don't know, we all do this. Like we get excited about something and then we
tunnel vision, like it must mean this, nothing else.
We try to fit everything into that. And so you cannot ignore passages that disprove your point. Okay. So if you come up, you have to come when you find passages that are like pushing against what you're excited about, just say, okay, maybe that's a different sense, or you have to incorporate that somewhere.
Or maybe I'm wrong.
Or maybe you're wrong. No, that can't be right. Okay. Next one. Do not make the audience choose between two options when maybe both are possible. This is
Okay.
just false dichotomy, right? It's either this or it's this, when maybe there's more options on the table.
Mhm.
Okay. So an example here is in Romans, righteousness of God. Does it mean God's righteousness, or is it our righteousness from God? Is it God's righteousness or our righteousness?
Yes.
Um, this is a very, very sticky question, but some people have argued maybe it is both. Like if you think, if I say, man, I'm just experiencing the goodness of God, is it my goodness or is it God's?
Mhm.
Well, I'm experiencing it, so it's mine, but it is
It's from
God's,
God ultimately,
right?
which kind of pushes a bit back into the fallacy before of like trying to stuff multiple meanings into words, but like the ball example, like they literally mean two separate things, where these are so closely connected that they may both be able to work at the same time.
Right.
Like God is giving us righteousness, and yet it's ultimately only from him.
Mhm.
Like, okay.
Yep. Okay. And this last one is just a great rule of life. in in interpreting the Bible. If no one else is saying it, neither should you.
You mean I like can't come up with a new meaning all on my own?
Yeah, you're probably wrong if you do. The Bible is probably the most thoroughly studied book in the last 2,000 years. So if you come up with a idea that no one else has seen, just be careful.
Well, and this is like shows valuing study Bibles and commentaries, which we've done episodes on and talked to so many people of like they have such good intentions to fully represent the Bible, and we can trust them, and they've put in so much more work than we have in studying this. So
like, use your tools. Don't
to check yourself.
Like
it might be right. Like you might actually have the Spirit might have revealed something to you that you didn't see before, and that's okay.
Or that people around you are saying, and then you go and check it, and all the tools are actually agreeing with you. And then maybe it's like, oh, I have something here, and you can go fight for it.
Yeah, just make sure you have something to back you up. Good point.
Yes. Okay. So you've done all your work. These are the fallacies.
You have a perfect word study.
You have the perfect word study, which we haven't even talked about, even how to do a perfect word study, but we'll get
Stay tuned.
But then here are other things to avoid. So the first one is pride.
Good thing to avoid.
We all struggle with this, but often I feel like we want to say, oh, the Greek word here means X. And the only reason we're bringing that up is to kind of like showcase the work that we've done.
Oh, or like I've studied and this is what I've come up with, kind of thing.
Look, I looked into the Greek. I know the Greek, and it's really not adding anything to the conversation.
Sure.
You could have gotten your same point across without even referring to the Greek.
Okay.
So usually if you don't need to use Greek and Hebrew, don't use it. Just generally. I think that's a helpful rule.
Okay.
And because second one is don't say anything that you're unaccountable to.
Like the audience can't check if you're right or not.
Yeah.
Because it's too above them.
So often when people say the Greek says, their brains turn off because they don't know. They don't know. They're like, oh, well, he must be right. He studied it. He did the Greek study, whatever.
And you become on top of everybody else.
Yeah.
And nobody can be like, well, I don't agree with that. Because I've also studied, like, not many people in the congregation have studied Greek.
Yeah. So either show your work. I looked into this word and here's what I've seen, like showing your work well. Or just be very certain that what you're saying is right. Which, if you don't know Greek and Hebrew, you have to be extra careful, right? And that's where I think showing your work is really important.
Or referring to commentary or referring to somebody else who backs you up.
For sure. Yeah, that would be part of showing your work.
Okay.
Okay, and so this means I strongly encourage to avoid the sentence, this Greek word means X, right? Because Greek words in general, like we were talking about ball, mean lots of things. Okay. That doesn't mean that it has no meaning.
Sure.
But rather than saying that, here's
what can we do?
What can we do?
Okay. Here.
as we close, and we'll talk about this more in future episodes, but okay. So what we can do is learn all the senses that a word can have. Okay.
All the senses, concepts.
Yes.
That it fits
all the
into.
concepts that it fit, the definitions, the concepts that it fits into.
Okay.
Yes. And so once you do that, okay, learn all the senses and then go use a concordance and read how that word is used. And I like to think in concentric circles. Okay. So looking at your passage, how is this word how is it part of the argument of this passage? Okay. Then look at the book. How is the word
a little bit broader?
Yeah, a little bit broader. How is the concept shaped throughout the book? The word
by the same author.
By the same.
Kind of what we're talking about earlier.
Well, that's the next one.
Oh.
Then often authors wrote
like books.
Paul. Paul wrote multiple letters, and then looking how Paul uses it in his letters. Okay. Then the rest of the canon, the New Testament, Old Testament, how is that used?
Okay.
And then cultural context, right? The rest of the either ancient Near Eastern world or the Greco-Roman world. And after you've done all that, or maybe you just looked at commentaries and such, and we'll get into all that. You can say this Greek word can mean,
or in this context, maybe,
or in similar context, this Greek word means, right? Because you've done the work and you know this word means this in this context, and you're here in similar context, and now
not ruling out anything else.
Now that's a good, right? You've done your work, looking at the meanings rightly, and then making a good point.
Okay,
and make that point.
Because Greek can be helpful, and like knowing what a word means in this context is helpful. I mean, if you don't know what words mean, you're not going to know what the text is saying. So we do need to do maybe more concept studies rather than word studies, possibly. But like don't stop doing them, but just be more careful when we do them.
Yeah. I've spent too many years of my life studying Greek to say that Greek doesn't matter. So don't go away from this hearing that Greek doesn't matter. Greek words matter.
And that's why we're doing this podcast too, to like show all of the work that's been put into the language and the Bible to make it more understandable for people, to make it easier to not do these fallacies. But there's hope for us. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Bible Toolbox. All of the resources mentioned in this episode are posted on our website, thebiblettoolbox.com. There you can also find out more information on how to give and support us. And we have loved all of the encouragement and feedback we've received from you. So thanks so much.